I never expected anything significant to happen that day, just another quiet afternoon at home, but being alone with my father changed everything. "Hurry up, son, before your mom gets back," he said, a tone of urgency in his voice, softened by familiarity. It wasn't alarming, just different. Enough to make my heart beat a little faster. What followed wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, intense, the kind of shift you don't notice until you're already deep in it. Even now, it's hard to say where that moment began and where it ended. Mom had left about an hour earlier, a quick run to the grocery store and post office. Nothing out of the ordinary. But the house, once she stepped out, took on a different kind of silence. Not empty, just paused, like everything was holding its breath. I'd just returned from my first year at college, and being back felt both familiar and distant. The house looked the same, but I didn't feel the same in it. My room, the hallway, even the old creaky stairs, everything felt a little smaller. And Dad, he looked just like I remembered. Tall, steady, with that quiet strength, though his eyes held a kind of tiredness I hadn't noticed before. Still, there was something about the way he looked at me that day. Something that said this wasn't just another lazy afternoon. We sat in the living room, golden sunlight spilling through the windows, casting warm lines across the carpet. The windows were open, letting in a gentle breeze that stirred the curtains like breath. The room smelled like citrus cleaner and old wood, oddly soothing. But underneath that calm was something else, a charge in the air, a quiet waiting. Dad sat on the edge of the couch, a beer in hand, legs relaxed, the other arm resting on the armrest like he wasn't sure what to do with himself. I sat across from him, the sun warming my legs from behind. We talked about little things, my college classes, professors, the neighbor's dog that still barked at everything. But the conversation felt slower, like we were both more aware of the silences than the words. Then he said, "You've changed a lot since you left." I looked up, my heart knocking once in my chest. "In a good way, I hope." He looked at me a moment longer than usual, not in a strange or uncomfortable way, just thoughtful. His gaze was searching, maybe even proud. I wasn't sure how to respond. Not with the way he was looking at me. It wasn't awkward, but it wasn't routine either. It was the kind of moment that makes you realize how time changes things, not always in big ways, but in quiet ones. And sometimes that's the hardest to understand. He looked at me for a moment, like he was trying to see something new, something he hadn't noticed before. I shifted in my seat, and oddly, that small movement made the room feel tighter, warmer. The air changed, just a little. He took another slow sip of his drink, not speaking right away. The silence pressed down between us until he finally said in a low voice, "You must have met someone." "At school, you mean?" I asked, trying to keep it casual. He nodded slightly. "Yeah." I gave a nervous laugh. "Not really, no one serious." He tilted his head, watching me, not with judgment, just curiosity. "Someone must have caught your attention." I shrugged. "Maybe. But honestly, I was too busy. School, work, life. Didn't leave much room for anything else." He gave a thoughtful nod, then said quietly, "You're not a boy anymore." That made me look at him, really look. And in that moment, something subtle shifted in the room. It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it, like those words meant more than what was on the surface. Something unspoken lingered in the air, and I felt it before I understood it. My breath hitched for a second. The silence between us was filled only by the ticking of the old clock above the fireplace. It felt louder than usual, like time itself was paying attention. Dad leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, his drink dangling loosely in one hand. "It's strange," he said softly, "having you back here." I tried to keep the mood light. "Why's that?" He paused. Because I keep noticing how much you've grown. You've changed. And I don't think I realized how much until just now. I didn't know how to respond. His tone had dropped again, soft and reflective, almost like he was talking more to himself than to me. But he kept looking at me with that same unreadable expression, the kind that made me feel like something more was hanging in the air, just out of reach. I shifted again, trying to release the tension in my shoulders. For a split second I caught his eyes flicker downward, toward the movement, quick, almost instinctual. He looked away just as fast. Not out of embarrassment, but like he was pulling something back inside. Containing it. It hit me harder than I expected. My chest tightened, my pulse rising without warning. Then he said out of nowhere, "Do you remember that summer when we used to stay up watching movies in here?" I blinked, grateful for the change in direction. "Yeah," I said, the memory catching in my throat, soft, familiar, and a little bittersweet. "I remember," I said, the words catching slightly in my throat. Dad smiled. "You'd always fall asleep before the ending, every time." "Only because you always picked the longest movies," I teased. He chuckled, soft, low. But it wasn't the same laugh I remembered. There was something underneath it, something heavier, warmer, like nostalgia wrapped in something unspoken. Another gust of wind came through the open window, making the curtain shift. This time the breeze brushed across my neck, and I shivered, unsure if it was from the cool air or the way his eyes lingered on me when I looked up again. "I missed this," he murmured, almost like he didn't mean to say it out loud. "Me too," I replied instinctively, and the moment the words left my mouth, I wished I could take them back. Not because they weren't true, but because of how they changed the air between us. His eyes darkened, just slightly, and something subtle shifted, a current running through the room that was impossible to ignore. He set his beer down on the table with a quiet clink. The sound echoed more than it should have in the stillness. Then he leaned back into the couch, his arms draped along the backrest. His body relaxed in a way that somehow made the tension worse. His shirt shifted as he moved, revealing the edge of his collarbone. A completely normal moment, and yet, somehow, it didn't feel that way at all. I stood up, almost on autopilot. "Gonna grab some water," I mumbled, anything to escape the thickening air. My steps were slow, uncertain as I walked into the kitchen. I needed a second to breathe, to reset. But before I could even reach the sink, I felt him behind me. He hadn't said a word. I just sensed him, like a thought I couldn't shake. I turned, slowly, and there he was, standing in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. "You okay?" he asked. There was nothing strange in the words, but the way he said them, quiet, weighted, made me tighten my grip on the glass I had just pulled from the cabinet. "Yeah," I replied too fast. "Just hot." He stepped into the kitchen. "I can turn the fan on." "No, it's fine," I said quickly, but we both knew it wasn't the temperature that had shifted. He looked at me for a long second, then nodded. Still, even as he walked to the fridge, the air between us stayed charged. Not awkward, just full of something we hadn't named. The fridge hummed softly as he lingered there, bottles clinking faintly as he reached inside. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I could feel his gaze on my back. When he finally moved, I heard the fridge door close with a soft thud. I turned just as he stepped back into the light, a water bottle in hand, and his eyes met mine instantly, like he'd been watching the whole time. There was a calmness in his expression now, but it wasn't less intense. If anything, it felt like a quiet before something inevitable, the stillness before a storm. "You sure you're all right?" he asked again, his voice gentler now, softer at the edges. I nodded, though my voice caught when I tried to speak. "Yeah, just being back here. It's a lot." He didn't press, just nodded, took a sip from the bottle and leaned back against the counter. His arms crossed. His gaze never left mine. The kitchen wasn't big. The hallway behind him was quiet. and I stood there, caught somewhere between nerves and something I couldn't name. A weight, a question, a memory I hadn't fully processed. The only sound was the steady tick of the clock from the living room. Then, tires on gravel. I jumped slightly, heart catching in my chest. But it wasn't anything unusual, just a neighbor pulling into their driveway. Still, the illusion cracked. The spell of the moment broke just enough for reality to seep back in. I glanced at him, and he was watching me again. This time with something more urgent in his eyes. "You remember the last time we were alone like this?" he asked, his voice low but steady. The question came out almost too casually. I shook my head, trying to recall. "I don't know, maybe before I left for college." He smirked slightly. "Even then, your mom was always hovering, always had some chore for me to do, or something for you to pack." His voice dipped lower, slower. That smile, it wasn't playful, it was thoughtful. The kind of look someone gives when they're trying to say more without saying it. And then, without meaning to, my eyes flicked downward, just for a second. The way his shirt clung to his chest, the light catching the faint veins in his forearm as he set the water bottle down. It was nothing, really. But my gaze lingered, and when I caught myself, a flush of heat crept up my cheeks. I looked away quickly, embarrassed. Not by him, but by my own awareness. Of course he noticed. He always did. He stepped away from the counter, slowly, not with purpose, but with a kind of presence. Like each step was an echo in the quiet, reminding me that we were still here, still alone, still circling something neither of us could quite name. "I used to worry about you a lot," he said, walking back toward the living room. "Out there on your own. Not because I didn't think you could handle it. I just missed you." I followed him, the glass still in my hand, though I hadn't taken a sip. "I missed you too," I said softly. He paused before reaching the couch, turning back to me. "Yeah," I nodded. "It's different out there. No one knows me. Not like you do." That landed. I saw it, the faint shift in his posture, the pause in his breath. He didn't say anything right away. He just sank back into the couch, casually, like he was trying not to let his thoughts show. I sat beside him again. Not too close, but closer than before. The kind of closeness that doesn't mean much until someone shifts a hand or a leg and suddenly the space between you vanishes. "You know," he said slowly, "I always thought you'd come back. Different. Like maybe you'd become someone else." "Maybe I did," I murmured. "A little." "No," he said. "Not really. You're still you." The words were quiet, but they echoed somewhere deeper. His voice had that gravelly softness he only used when something mattered. I felt it. His hand was resting on the couch now, not reaching, not moving, just there, open, still, like a pause waiting for something to fill it, and I noticed it more than I meant to. Every second it stayed there, it felt more deliberate, even though it hadn't moved an inch. The silence stretched again. All I could hear was my own heartbeat. "Do you ever feel," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "like something's just beneath the surface? Like there's something you're supposed to say, but if you say it, everything might change?" He looked over at me, eyes thoughtful. "Yeah," he said, "all the time." "Surface?" The word slipped out before I could stop it. He looked at me, brows raised slightly. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," I said, trying to laugh it off. "It just feels like something's about to happen, and you're acting like you don't see it, like ignoring it makes it easier." He didn't smile, didn't nod. He just stared at me, eyes locked. Breathing slowed. The tension in the room thickened, almost suffocating. After a moment, he said quietly, "Yeah, I know exactly what you mean." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. I should have looked away, said something sarcastic, laughed, but I didn't. I kept looking at him, and he kept looking at me. And in that heavy silence, something shifted. It wasn't physical, not yet, but it was more than that. a kind of awareness that blurred everything else out, the kind that makes the air between two people feel like a fuse waiting for a spark. He leaned in, not all the way, just enough to tilt the world slightly off balance, close enough that I could feel the weight of his thoughts pressing into mine, silent but loud. "Do you ever think we talk around things too much?" he asked. I blinked. "Like what?" He didn't look away. "Like the way you've been looking at me since you got back." I froze. Every part of me went still, but he didn't pull away, didn't laugh. He just waited. "I'm not," I started, but the words caught, because I had been looking at him, wondering, feeling things I couldn't name, trying to understand why being near him twisted my stomach in ways that had nothing to do with nerves, and everything to do with something deeper, something heavier. "You don't have to say anything," he said, his voice softer now. "I just wanted to know I wasn't imagining it." I looked down, couldn't speak. But the silence said more than words ever could. His hand shifted, just slightly, but it was enough. His knuckles brushed against mine, barely touching, and neither of us moved. For a moment we sat there, skin against skin, breath shallow, minds racing. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. Then, the sound of a car engine echoed faintly down the street. He heard it too. His body tensed, eyes flicked to the window as the sound faded. "Not yet," he murmured, almost to himself. Then he turned back to me, voice even lower. "But we don't have much time." And that was the first time he said it. Not in words, but in everything else. Not fear, but something else. A quiet urgency curled in my stomach and refused to let go. I didn't move, I didn't speak, and somewhere deep down, we both understood. This wasn't going to slow down, it was going to spiral. The story wasn't over, because something had started now, and once it had, there was no turning back. No brakes. Only gravity. The air between us had changed completely, and this time neither of us tried to deny it. His hand was still near mine. It hadn't moved again, but it didn't have to. The space around it throbbed with something unspoken, like every word we hadn't said was hovering just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to break through. He glanced at the window again. The engine we'd heard? Just a neighbor pulling into their driveway, but the sound had left behind a tension, a fragile, electrified silence, like we were one breath away from shattering it. My breathing grew uneven, my chest rising and falling too fast. But I couldn't calm it. Not with him this close, not with that silence wrapped tight around us like a string ready to snap. "Come here," he said, rough, low, almost a whisper, but not a question. I didn't move right away, just looked at him. Heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. Still he watched me, steady, certain, and something in that quiet confidence pulled me in. My body moved before my thoughts could stop it. I slid closer, slow, hesitant, but I moved. He didn't reach for me, didn't guide me, but the heat coming off him now, I could feel it. Our legs brushed, and just that light contact sent a jolt of fire through me. I should have pulled away, should have said something, but I didn't. Not with his eyes locked on mine like that. Not when he was looking at me like he already knew I wouldn't stop, like he saw all the parts of me I hadn't meant to show. Then his hand moved again, resting gently on my knee, not pushing, just there, solid, present, claiming the moment. And it was wild, completely wild how that simple touch sent a bolt of electricity up my spine. My skin lit up under his palm, my breath caught. "We don't have much time," he said again. But this time, the words meant something else. They weren't casual, they weren't a warning. They were a door. Opening. My head spun. "Dad," I whispered, barely audible, almost involuntary. He didn't answer, not with words. Instead, his thumb moved, slow, deliberate, tracing softly along the inside of my knee. It was just a light touch on my thigh, barely anything, but it felt electric. My legs tensed slightly, though I didn't move away. I couldn't. I knew I should have said something, should have pulled back, but I didn't. I froze, stuck between a wave of panic and something warmer, something deeper, that grew stronger the longer we sat there. I shouldn't, I began, but the words never made it out. Because then, he leaned in. Not all the way, just close enough that I could feel his breath against my cheek. It was warm, slow, barely there. His hand was still resting on my leg, so gentle, almost like it wasn't real. But the closeness, the intensity, made it feel like he was everywhere, and I hated how much I didn't want him to move away. "This doesn't have to mean anything," he said, voice soft, not like he was persuading me, but simply stating a fact. "It's just us right now." Those words sank in like water slipping through cracks, filling spaces inside me I wasn't ready to face. I should have said no. I should have stood up, should have shouted something, anything. But I didn't. Because the truth? I didn't want to. I leaned in. Just a little. That was all it took. His other hand moved up slowly, gently, brushing the side of my face. His touch was steady, grounding. When his thumb traced the edge of my jaw, everything else inside me went still. No more overthinking. Just breathe, just warmth, just the sound of the clock ticking. "We have to be quick," he whispered, a hint of urgency sneaking back into his voice. "Your mom won't be long." My heart stumbled in my chest. I should have been scared, maybe even ashamed. But somehow, that urgency only sharpened everything. Every motion, every word, every inch between us felt like it was fading. Fast. The outside world? Gone. His lips barely brushed my jaw. Not quite a kiss, not really, just a touch. But I gasped anyway. My fingers gripped the couch cushion, holding on. His breath hovered near my neck, and the feel of it made my skin spark. "I've missed you like this," he murmured. "And I don't even know what this means anymore. Being close, being alone, being something more. All I knew was I was burning, and I wasn't pulling away." His hand moved lower, tracing the shape of my leg. The other rested gently on my back, never forcing, just waiting. But I felt the invitation in him, in all of him. His nearness felt like gravity, and I had already stopped resisting. "You're shaking," he whispered, voice brushing against my ear. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted. "Neither do I," he breathed. "But it feels right." And somehow, it did. It felt like stepping off the edge of something I didn't even realize I'd been standing on, like gravity had been tugging us toward this moment all along, and only now were we seeing it clearly. Then he leaned in fully. His mouth met the side of my neck. Just a soft press, nothing more. But it sent my entire body into a quiet spiral. Without thinking, my hand moved to his chest. His heart was pounding, just like mine, and somehow that made it real, in a way I hadn't been ready for. My fingers tightened slightly. He responded by kissing lower, slower. The room tilted around us. Time warped. And just as I felt myself slipping completely into whatever this was, into whatever we were becoming, the clock struck. One sharp chime. I jumped. He froze. Both of us turned toward the window, half expecting to see her car pulling in already. But the street was still empty, still quiet. He looked back at me, his voice now a low whisper, his eyes darker, steadier. "Just a little more," he said. "We've still got time." My lips parted, maybe to say yes, maybe no. I wasn't sure. But then he kissed me. Just once. A light, almost hesitant kiss, barely a brush of lips, but it landed with the weight of something bigger than us. It hit me in the chest like a tidal wave. He pulled back, searching my eyes. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded. It was a lie, but it was all I could manage. He leaned in again, slower this time. One hand slid gently up my back, the other still resting near my leg. The couch creaked beneath us. Every little sound felt amplified, the ticking clock, a bird calling from somewhere outside, my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. And then, in the middle of all that noise, he whispered something that shattered everything. "Hurry, before your mom gets back." Those words broke something inside me. My fingers clutched his shirt, my breath caught, and I let go, not of myself, but of everything else. In that instant, we weren't anything. Not labels, not roles, not expectations, just two people suspended in a moment so intense, so still, it screamed. His hands moved with aching care, tracing the edges of my sides, testing how much space this moment had left. He was gentle, watching every twitch in my body, reading every breath, every hesitation. And then, just when I thought the moment might stretch forever, a car door slammed. We both flinched, heads snapping toward the window. Panic sliced through the room like cold steel. He moved first, pulling away in one sharp breath. I scrambled to my feet, my chest heaving, hands shaking, still reeling from what had just happened. "She's home," he said quickly, already smoothing out his shirt. "Go upstairs. Now." I didn't argue. I ran. I barely made it to the stairs, legs shaky, heart pounding harder than it ever had. My body still hummed with the echoes of what had almost happened. What had already happened. And the scariest part? I didn't want it to end. But this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning, because the moment I reached the top of the stairs, breathless, trembling, I knew. Something had shifted. Something had broken open inside both of us, and whatever came next, there was no going back. I didn't stop moving until I was in my room, the door closing behind me with a soft click that felt thunderously loud. My knees nearly gave out as I leaned back against the door, lungs burning, my chest rising and falling like I'd just run miles. My hand lifted to my mouth, still tingling, still warm, still carrying the memory of his lips. Too recent, too real. The trace of that moment clung to me, and no matter how much I tried to focus, I couldn't forget the heat of it. Downstairs, I heard her voice, light and casual, like always. "I'm home." Like nothing had changed. Like the walls hadn't just witnessed something that shattered the fragile order of everything we thought was safe. I didn't move. Couldn't. My mind was caught in a storm of emotion, shock, guilt, and something else I didn't dare name. I felt hot and cold at the same time, numb but burning. Every inch of my skin still aware of where he'd touched me, every muscle aching from adrenaline, every thought spiraling too fast to grasp. I shouldn't have let it happen. I should have stopped him, but I didn't. And now, that truth sat heavy in my stomach, unmovable. From downstairs I could hear their voices, her and his. So normal, so painfully ordinary. Small talk, groceries, a laugh about traffic, their daily rhythm, like nothing was different. It made me want to scream. I went to the window, cracked it open, just a little, hoping the cool air would ease the fire in my chest. But it didn't help. Nothing did. I still felt like I was falling. Then, a soft knock at the door. I froze. Everything in me went still. "It's me," he said quietly. I didn't respond. "I won't come in," he added, his voice low and careful. I needed to know you're okay." I stayed silent for a moment, trying to gather myself. Finally, I forced out a whisper. "I don't know if I am." There was a pause, a long one. I could feel him there, just outside the door, standing still like he couldn't bring himself to walk away. "I didn't mean for that to happen," he said, his voice barely a breath. I almost didn't hear it. But it happened, and the words slipped out of me before I could stop them. Sharp, fragile, too honest. It did. Another long silence followed. Then I heard his footsteps retreating down the hall. Each step seemed to echo in my chest, louder than it did on the wooden floor beneath him. I sat on my bed, staring at the wall, barely hearing anything else. All I could do was replay it, again and again, The closeness, the heat, the way his voice had dropped when he whispered, "Hurry, son." It had been wrong, I knew that. But there was something so terrifying about how much I didn't want to undo it. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. And the next morning, everything was colder, stiffer. At breakfast, we sat around the table like strangers trying to remember a script. Mom chatted cheerfully, completely unaware of how my eyes avoided his, how my body flinched whenever his voice cut through the air. He was quieter than usual, didn't push for conversation. But every now and then, I caught his gaze, flicking toward me, quick and nervous, like he was searching for a sign, for something that wasn't there. After Mom left for a dentist appointment, the silence crashed back down. I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing my mug, the emptiness of it too much. Then I felt him, quietly, like always. He was there behind me, and I didn't have to turn around to know. The weight in the room, that suffocating pressure, it made it hard to breathe. "I didn't sleep," I said suddenly, my back still to him. "Me neither," he replied, his voice low, distant. "I keep thinking, what if she had come back just 5 minutes earlier?" I turned slowly. He was standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable, but his eyes always told the truth. "I keep thinking about everything," I said. "About how fast it happened, about how I didn't stop it." "I should have stopped it," he whispered, his voice barely a murmur. "No," I cut in. "It wasn't just you." The silence between us stretched longer than it should have. The air between us thickened. We both knew that nothing could make it right, but it was enough to make us both realize we couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. "We crossed a line," I whispered. He nodded. "Yeah, but I don't think I regret it." I didn't expect him to say that. My breath caught in my chest, and I looked at him more intently, trying to make sense of what he meant. "You don't?" I asked. His jaw tightened just a little, the weight of his words settling between us. "I regret how it happened," he said, his voice steady. "The way it felt rushed, like we were running from something instead of moving toward it. But what I felt when you looked at me, when you didn't pull away, I can't regret that." I didn't know how to respond. My thoughts tangled in a storm of emotions, crashing into each other like waves. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to accuse him of complicating everything. But another part, the quieter, more dangerous part, felt a strange sense of relief. Because deep down, I didn't regret it either, and that thought terrified me. He stepped closer, slow and careful, like he was testing the ground between us. "We don't have to pretend it didn't happen," he said, his voice softer now. "But we also don't have to let it ruin everything." I shook my head. How do we even move forward from something like this? He paused, then spoke, his words calm and steady. "We just take it one step at a time. We don't push it. We don't run. We just live with it and try to figure it out." I looked down, not trusting myself to meet his eyes again. But even without looking at him, I could feel him move closer. I could feel the warmth of his body now, just inches away. Even though I knew it wasn't right, part of me didn't want to pull away. I had already crossed that line. There was no turning back now. He reached out slowly, like he was testing the air between us. His hand hovered for a moment before brushing gently against mine. I didn't pull away. The touch was soft, not demanding, just a quiet question, unspoken, yet clear. "I'm not asking for anything," he said, his voice low. "Not now, not tomorrow. I just don't want you to feel like you're carrying it alone." I nodded slowly, still unsure of what to say. We stood there, in the kitchen, the sunlight warming the floor beneath our feet. Neither of us knew what came next, but in that moment it didn't matter. The weight of it all lingered, unspoken, hanging between us like smoke. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I wasn't wondering if something would happen again. I was wondering when. When Mom returned, Everything seemed unchanged. Her voice was the same, her smile still warm. The world hadn't noticed the crack, but we had. And no matter how normal it looked on the outside, we knew we weren't living in the same version of it anymore. That night, I stared at the ceiling, fingers curled tight into the sheets. I could still feel the echoes of everything we didn't say, the closeness, the urgency, the hunger that barely touched but was impossible to ignore. Even though I told myself not to, especially because I told myself not to, I hoped he was awake too. I hoped he was thinking about the same moment, replaying it like I was, because now I knew one thing for certain. Whatever we started that day didn't end when the door closed. It only began, quiet, dangerous, impossible to undo. And I didn't know if I was scared of it or if I was waiting for it to happen again. In the following weeks, I tried to live like nothing had changed. I went back to school, sat through lectures, joked with friends, and turned in assignments on time. But no matter how normal the outside world looked, inside I was anything but. Every quiet moment was an echo of his touch, his breath, our silence that didn't need words to be understood. I kept thinking it would fade. Maybe the distance would make it easier, dissolve the pull between us. But it didn't. If anything, it only sharpened it. Late at night, I'd catch myself replaying every second in that living room. Every glance, every breathless pause. My phone would light up sometimes with his name, and I'd freeze, wondering if we were about to cross another line, or just remember the one we already had. Sometimes he'd send something harmless, a picture of the backyard, a funny comment about Mom's new obsession with herbal tea. But buried in between those moments were the quiet acknowledgments, ones that didn't say much but meant everything. "I couldn't sleep again," he'd write. Or, "I keep thinking about the way you looked at me." We didn't have answers. Neither of us did. But we were still circling something we hadn't named yet, something unfinished. And in the quiet hours, when the world was asleep and the silence grew too loud, I knew one thing for certain. We hadn't closed that door. We had just left it slightly open, waiting to see if either of us would walk through it again.